Hi everyone, we are peering into the Bat Cave on this episode of one Paul Rashid. Paul, thank you for joining and talking with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason.
Absolutely, absolutely. You are a person who works in the world of comics. You've worked in the world of film. I believe you also carry an MD status. Is this correct?
That's right. Yeah, just a little bit about me. Um, my name is Paul Rashid, born, raised, and educated in West by God, Virginia. Until
Very
I,
nice.
until I uh, wanted to seek else. I was a ravage TV watcher and film watcher growing up. Um, and if I got into film at an early age, of recording camcorder to camcorder with my buddies in the '90s. I feel like if I was just a few decades later, I would be have a had the ability to have a supercomputer in my hand. I think I would have been a teenager making podcasts and movies. But we did what we had with the technology at the time. I mention that because a lot of the setting of TV and films in America are set in New York or California. And being from Charleston, West Virginia, I had an amazing childhood and upbringing, and all my family's still there. But I wanted something else. I had a desire, and then I was fortunate to get a position at the San Diego La Jolla VA to work with veterans and do psychiatric treatment and psychotherapy with them. And then ultimately, years later, I was able to get to New York City. I worked there for 6 to 7 months in Manhattan before moving permanently to Florida. And and then I just want to say it. I hadn't known about you until just recently. My comic book editor Charles Santino had informed me
Mhm.
of you, and I watched a few of your podcasts and really just blown away. So I'm really looking forward to today. Um, I'm curious a little bit. I think I might learn more today than hopefully you or your audience. But what really intrigued me was your PhD education, and I'm going to just segue and finish up my introduction is that my calling for this Kickstarter, Bootstrapped, teaching people how to
Mhm.
make their first comic book, because I was so influenced by comic books again in my childhood, um, is that I was writing my comic book, The Red Ram, and through this journey, I read about 15 or 16 books on how to make comic books. I say that, and I have the picture on my kitchen table of all the books I read laid out with the picture and the Kickstarter just to share my learning journey. I like I said, I just when I get on something, I devour information on it until I've exhausted everything. But I'm surprised I didn't find out about your book, and maybe it was just the title because I think you call it graphic novel, and I was probably
Mhm.
looking how to make comic books. So I think after this call, I'm gonna go on Amazon and get my copy, and I can't wait to see what all's in there.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, graphic novels is a term they use in the title. I use the term comics pretty interchangeably with that too. And you mentioned Red Ram. I've seen some of that work that you've done, and that looks fascinating. Love the character design there, and you are now creating this resource that people can go to think about how they make comics, and also how they get comics out into the mainstream. So sharing some appreciation there. What led you to comics and storytelling? Was I'm noticing Batman back there. Was that part of the journey?
Batman, it was, yeah. So many ways I could go, but with movies, obviously, and I graduated high school about 1997, just to give a kind of timestamp in there, and grew up with the Christopher Reeves Superman movies, Michael Keaton's Batman, and that's about. I got into comics right around like 1990, 92, right when Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man was coming out, and then
Mhm.
the onslaught of the independent comics that then followed. Um, so I love those movies. Actually, the way I got into comics though is besides reading a few comics in grade school, I was about I think 12 years old. We were on a family trip in Galveston, Texas. I still remember, and we were at a flea market the peanut butter gallery, and mom said, why don't you and your sister pick out a souvenir for the trip? So we're looking around. I don't know what to get. And my older sister says, oh, Paul, there's a box of comic books. Why don't you get one? And I said, of course. I'm 12 years old. Nicole, comics are stupid.
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
later that evening, we're having dinner with one of my dad's colleagues and friends, and he's telling me all about how his son's into comic books. And boom, my mom says, a light bulb went off. And of course, I'm pestering my family to take me to the peanut gallery before we fly out that morning. And mom says no, but that she's going to take me to a comic book store when we go home. And mom did. I'm from Charleston, West Virginia. We went to Comic World in the West Side, which ultimately led to me working there in junior high and high school every Saturday, which was very formidable times in my childhood, great memories, and that's how it started.
Nice. Nice. Now tell us a little bit about Bootstrapped. What are you hoping that the book accomplishes? How do you hope that it inspires or helps people?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of how-to books out there, how to make comics, and I enjoyed all of them. I found that, and it's cool. One thing I learned at WVU from my biology professor was, if you want to learn something, read several different books on it, because you're going to get a different perspective, and each will kind of fill in some gaps that may be lacking, because no one can be fully complete. What I liked about the books, understanding comics is, I think, one of my top, just because even though we might read comic books, to understand the invisible art of visual storytelling was mind altering. And then you have there were several books that just kind of tell you the process for someone. Again, if you don't know, we may know watch movies, but that doesn't mean you understand what it means to be an actor, to be a director, to be on a set and a crew, and all the time and energy it would take to watch or read the final project. So I learned a lot on these books. One book that also stood out was Josh Blaylock's book, and I was able to collaborate with him on a few different projects. And it was just great because I liked his, because not only was he, and I was able to interview him for the Bootstrapped, but I learned his hero origins of his first comic book, which was really bootstrapped. He was 18 years old. He made it at his school press. I don't know what school has a comic press, but he was or a printing press, but was able to do that. He truly bootstrapped it. He got money from his, I think it was an uncle and father that helped fund and kickstart so he could pay for those copies. And he also talks about the business of comic book publishing, which I just think it was a nice addition that I didn't see that in the other books. So again,
Hmm.
what am I trying to accomplish? I think that the older I get, and I am a physician, you had mentioned, I'm a psychiatrist. So I love my career. I'm able to help people. People tell me and psychiatrists and therapists things that they sometimes don't share with any other person. And even though I went into medicine and science was my strength, I definitely think that psychiatry is one aspect of medicine that overlaps with the human condition. And my hope was, the older I'm getting, I'm realizing the importance of people. I think on one of your podcasts you mentioned you might not have developed your voice until maybe in the last recent years. I'm developing my voice, my vision. And I think that a lot of people have dreams and desires, but never fulfill them. I want to help
Hmm.
them realize they can fulfill, anyone can fulfill their dreams. And we are at a time in history that it's easier than ever. As I said, if I wanted to make a film in the 70s or 80s, you'd have to get real film, which is very expensive, and processing and all these different things. You'd have to be in the industry. Fast forward now, and I'm just making an analogy to the film industry, but literally, now you could make a video on a cell phone or smartphone, which is in most Americans, and honestly, in about 6 billion of the 8 billion people on this earth right now. And with free software, edit together a short film that could be a few seconds or a few minutes or a few hours. Now, I agree. It's not going to be a Hollywood blockbuster. Be very clear about that. But someone might see that. And could lead to another project, or or just the satisfaction of, hey, showing your friends what you made, and becoming a creator and expressing yourself. And with Bootstrapped, my specific approach is one thing I learned in medical school. I want to help people. I had to take in a lot of information. And how do you take in a lot of information and not get, and I'm very guilty of being sometimes stuck in my research phase and not then doing. So, how do we get someone who might be wanting to create something but afraid to do it, how to empower them to make something and make it quickly and finish your project, and not just pull out some drafts you have from 10 years ago, but let's get them out there. Let's publish them. So I'm curious what your response would be to my approach and to teaching something very quickly. In medical school, you're taking in a lot of information, and when you're starting to see patients, there's an adage: see one, do one, teach one. That can be very anxiety provoking. I mean, we're talking about people's bodies. Sometimes, in like in a surgery, if you're learning how to do a procedure or how to stitch up a suture or give stitches, you have to start somewhere with the supervision of an attending physician, a resident. And I'll give an analogy to, I kind of use this analogy of just a Kickstarter. Have you ever Kickstarted an item or a book?
I haven't. No.
Or even just creating a book. I'm going to do an analogy though. Let's say just purchasing a book off of, say, a online commerce. So let's see one. So purchase that book, see what the process is like, so you understand the payment process and the features through it, which look simple and pushing a button, but then understanding how it works, seeing how it gets to you in the mail, how it's packaged, and then reading the end result. Okay, you see one. Now do one. Okay, here's a book. We type on a typewriter or by hand or in a Word document, and get that one out, and then teach one. Now, teaching one could be, I learned how to do my first book. I'm going to kind of reteach myself, and now I got to go back through those steps. And hopefully, each time you reiterate, you cut down your learning curve. That could be sharing a process with a friend. It could be sharing it on a podcast. But I think what's crucial is, and how we learn, is that we have to encode the information. And I think it's so important that and that's why in school sometimes you'll hear, if you can teach the concept, teach it to if you can teach it to a friend. And that's why study groups are so powerful. And I didn't really realize the power until medical school. I should have been doing this the whole time in university and high school. But if you can teach this concept in biochemistry, this complex thing that I can't get, but if I can teach my friend it, through that process of encoding it and then decoding it and making sure it makes sense, then you have then mastered that information. So I have a 3-step way to cut down your learning quickly and effectively. I'm just curious, what's your thought about my approach?
I like that. I think it lines up very much with like modeling, which I think is one of the best ways to learn. Especially, I'm in the world of reading, and reading is something that's usually an invisible practice. You don't see all of the things that are happening in the process of reading. So, making those things visible, talking through them, and then allowing someone to kind of see that process and try it out, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And that what you just said, the modeling, well, isn't that the way of apprenticeship and how information was handed down for generations, especially in, I'm just going to say medieval Europe, but probably dates back to most societies?
There are always two, a master and an apprentice.
There you go. Well said. And then, yeah. So
from the world of George Lucas, there it is.
yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Because you mentioned in one of your interviews how reading to definitely use your imagination, and I think we know that, or it's kind of an unconscious process. But when you said that, again, from where I am hearing it now, it made it even more important to actively imagine the scene when you're reading, because the more you use that muscle, the stronger it will get. And I'm toying with I've created a few. I've never really written any horror. I take that back. In film, I wrote a lot of screenplays for horror that I would self-direct these, kind of amateur filmmaking in my early 20s. So I always liked
Mm.
horror, not only because it was fun and I grew up with, Jason and Freddy, but I knew for a filmmaker, it's easier to make a horror film on a shoestring or bootstrap budget than another, film. So I always had that. I always liked horror, and with my Comics Magic Substack, my award-winning artist Miguel Galindo, he just has the most stunning comic artwork and can work in a variety of different styles. We're doing a horror comic book, but as
That's
I'm still learning more about that genre again, rekindling that flame from a few decades ago. I'm thinking about how I need to engage my imagination a little bit more, especially for that genre.
yeah, yeah. Uh, so what for you as a creator, and you can also speak on the reader side, what makes comics this special, attractive space? And then what makes Kickstarter, you've kind of alluded to this, but there's an accessibility, right, to Kickstarter that we've not seen in decades past.
Absolutely. For me, just comics, just from a consumer of comic books,
Hmm.
I loved it because one, the artwork. My family, my mother's an artist. She taught art. My parents used to have an art gallery many years ago, so art has always been an aspect of my life. I love, again, I was a real big fan of the Todd McFarlane and the Jim Lees in the early 90s. So one, it's a beautiful visual art form. It is a visual storytelling. Stories resonate with me deeply, and I'm going to go back to that storytelling in a second. But and it's something that kids like to do, and some kids might collect baseball cards, and I had a few baseball cards that you could trade or so. But you can also read the comic book,
Hmm. Hmm.
to that. The the thing I wanted to mention with the storytelling, I'm a huge fan and advocate of James Campbell and the hero's archetypal journey. I I've just been fascinated with his work, and I've watched many videos with him. And in Bootstrapped, I even referenced there's a YouTube video that's free to view called, I believe it's called Finding Joe. And I just think this is required viewing for any writer or artist,
Hmm.
and literally should just be required viewing for anyone because of how just deeply this resonates in us. And just going back to movies, television, podcasts, stories, it's all dates back to the oral tradition of us humans sitting around a campfire, maybe even getting some of the ash charcoal and drawing a picture on a cave wall. And then how it goes from there to hieroglyphics, and then years and centuries later, the written word. But it all goes back to story is innate in us. That's how we process and learn information. And so that's why I love comic books. I'm going to pause there before we go into Kickstarter. If you have any thoughts about Joseph Campbell.